Good morning, and thank you for joining us. A nephew once asked me when he was quite young, "Who dies?" I said, "Everyone dies. No use denying it, one day we're done. Oh, everyone dies." Wise men and prophets, they've all had their say on the nature of their afterlives. But in case there's no beer there, we'll have one more round. Oh, everyone dies. So wrote the Canadian singer-songwriter James Keelaghan, and if that is true, then at one time in our life, everyone will be bereaved of someone they love. Bereavement is a universal component of our humanity. And if the church and its compassion are to be rooted, firmly located in the places of people's pain and suffering, then being alongside people who are bereaved is crucial. So let me begin by demythologizing a couple of issues before I move into some practicalities. Firstly, we are told that in a more open society, free from the unnatural restraints of the stiff upper lip culture of past generations, bereaved people are now better understood and supported. A symbol of that societal change, commentators say, was the death of the Princess of Wales 2 decades ago. The public outpouring of grief, the unrestrained expressions of sorrow, the openness with which people were talking about loss. And when you have the princes, William and Harry, talking openly on television about the death of their mother and their own feelings, surely people say we are more open now. Death and dying are on our agenda. Bereavement is better understood. But I suggest today that's not so. My experience with many of the bereaved people I work with tells me that, if anything, bereaved people are more isolated in their grief than ever before. Gone are the widow's weeds. Gone are the men who doff their hats as a hearse goes by. Gone is the cortege. Gone are the curtains closed as a public expression of mourning. Gone, largely, is the funeral going from the home. And this may be controversial. Gone or going is mourning at funerals, when the no black please culture and the celebration of life squeezes out the tears and the keening and the wailing and the public expression of the devastation of loss. And in addition, society gives us so little time to grieve. Back at work, back doing the weekly shop, back putting the face on. "How are you, hen?" "Ach, not too bad. Getting there. Ups and downs. Fine." Inadequate language for a society that wants itself to get on and wants signals from bereaved people that they are getting on too. And all of this, I believe, leads to a greater sense of isolation for bereaved people than ever before. And families? No more able to be open and supportive by and large than society in general. When my mother died, I phoned my father every Sunday. "How are you, Dad?" I would ask. "Fine, son, fine. And how are you?" "Fine, just fine," I would reply. And I would come off the phone and cry. And my dad would come off the phone and cry. And how did I know that? Because my wife and my sister, who lived with my dad, grassed on us. But could we talk to each other about the loss of my mother? Not a chance. Isolated in our grief. And the second and related issue which needs some demythologizing is this. To express our sorrow in loss does not mean there is something wrong. Bereavement is not an illness to be cured or a problem to be solved. Bereavement is a journey to be traveled. A personal, uncertain, unknown, tortuous journey. There is no fixing of loss. But there is more that is normal in grief than there are abnormalities. Too often and too readily, grief is labelled as complex when it isn't. And too often, people facing the normalities of loss feel it is complex because they have nothing against which to measure the normality of it. So, when someone puts a bolster pillow next to them in the bed to make them feel someone is there, or wears their husband's jammies, or dabs their wrists with their wife's perfume, or sends an email to the account of a deceased friend, or lays a place at the kitchen table for their dead father, or sleeps in their daughter's bed, or doesn't unpack the case they took home from hospital after their mother died. Complex? Abnormal? I don't think so. For these are all facets of bereavement coping strategies which have been shared with me by people I've worked with in recent times. In bereavement, people need to find normality, to be reassured in their normality, and not be labelled all too readily as complicated or abnormal. So, having done some demythologizing, let me suggest how pastoral care for bereaved people might be handled a little better. I want to suggest two things. Firstly, for too long, bereavement support has been left in the hands of the minister or the deacon or the professional church worker. Fine, as far as it goes. But not all ministers or deacons are adequately equipped to understand, far less to offer good bereavement care. Training, personality, theology, lack of self-knowledge are all factors. And when you add into that mix the problems of time and workload, the increasing number of funerals in which the church, and therefore the minister, have no involvement, over 50% in the case of one major Edinburgh funeral director, then to leave bereavement care solely in the hands of the professional church worker can be problematic. So the approach to this has to be the calling forth of the gifts of the people of God, the empowerment of the laity, the ministry of the whole people, the sharing of the load, however it's described. And it's encouraging that this is the way more and more churches are seeing things, using pastoral groups or bereavement teams. In my own congregation, we have a team of 8 trained, supported, and valued members of the congregation who are involved in bereavement support. And thankfully, this is not unusual. And it has a number of benefits. It shares the pastoral load. It affirms the gifts of the whole people of God. It values the insights of people who may know more about bereavement than the minister does. And it offers signals to a community, such as being alongside, fellow travellers, journeying and not fixing. And of course, there are a number of issues which have to be got right. Adequate training, issues of confidentiality, quality control. Does the team have a leader who isn't the minister? Can the minister let go? However, if these are worked on, then there is a platform, a firm foundation for good work to be done. But there is a second aspect of care for those who are bereaved which needs to be emphasized. We need to find models of bereavement support which are not based exclusively on one-to-one visits to people's homes. Now, don't get me wrong, good work is done by good people on a one-to-one basis at people's firesides. I've been there. But that model and the equipping of people to carry it through is often replicated when the laity is empowered and a pastoral care team is in place. You visit, you go to people, you listen, you counsel, you might even offer advice, you may pray, but all on a one-to-one basis, for there's nothing else on offer. But how do we ensure quality control? How do we know when bereavement care should come to an end? How often do you visit? How many on a caseload? Where is the supervision? What is supervision? And there are always the questions for the visitor of burnout, and for the bereaved person, do you believe you're normal just because one person says you are? So in recent years, I've been working with a different model, a group-based model, which begins to answer some of these questions. And quite remarkably and movingly and spiritually, when people who are bereaved are brought together, rather than disappearing into a black hole of sorrow or depression or hopelessness, people feel less isolated. One person's story articulates another person's needs. One person's yearnings find an empathy in another person's tears. One person's nod offers affirmation to someone who's sharing part of their story that they've never shared before. One person's anger finds acceptance in another person's thanks. One person's pain finds healing in another person's love. A forum for people to tell their story and to know that they are being listened to, included, normalized, and not judged. This is the model of bereavement support that we offer in my own church in Chalmers Memorial in Port Seaton. We call it Stepping Stones. We meet in the local community centre. We offer 2 bereavement support programs a year. Talk with me privately if you want more information. And I'm delighted that a number of churches have taken up or are looking at this model of bereavement support as a new and effective way of approaching this vital aspect of pastoral care. So to summarise, bereaved people need to be supported more than ever before. Fundamental to that support is the normalizing of people's experiences. We have to call forth the gifts of the whole people of God, and finding and developing group-based models of bereavement support is an effective way forward. So let me close with a story. I worked recently in a group with 3 men, all bereaved of their wives after many years of marriage. One bereaved 9 months, one about 6 months, and one about 3 months. And towards the end of the group, I asked them, is there anything we hadn't covered that anybody wanted to talk about? And the man who was bereaved about 9 months said, yes. He said, in the words of the Edinburgh vernacular, my daughter's nipping my head. And I asked why. And he said, well, I've still got the wife's clothes in the wardrobe, and she thinks I'm stuck because I haven't put them out yet. And I was about to say, that's fine, when he said, actually, sometimes I open the wardrobe door and I look at the clothes because they remind me of my wife. And I was about to say, that's fine, when he leaned forward and dropped his voice to a whisper and said, actually, sometimes I take a blouse off a hanger and I hold it to my face so that I can smell my wife's perfume. And he leaned back as if he'd got this huge weight off his shoulders. And I was about to say, that's fine, when the chap who was bereaved about 6 months said, and I'll not repeat this because there's a sweary word in it, my goodness, would you believe it? I do exactly the same. And I thought I was nuts. And the 2 of them laughed. And the third chap, bereaved about 3 months, who hadn't contributed much to the discussion up to that point, smiled and said, well, guys, I do exactly the same. And now we have 3 men who are finding that because one of them was brave enough to say, this is my story, we're able to understand that from their own experience. And on the way out in the corridor, they were swapping phone numbers. And I heard the chap who'd started the discussion saying, I'm just going to go home and tell my daughter to get off my case because there's 2 other guys that are the same as me. Job done. Good bereavement care offered. 3 men feeling less isolated in their bereavement journey. And 3 widowers finding, at least for a moment, that they were able to smile once again. Thank you.